Welcome back, everybody, to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host, Solaris Blue Raven, and I'm here with my very special guest, John Hanson. And John, you with me?
I am with you, yes.
All right.
We're still together.
Excellent. And I was going to ask you, I know we headed for a break there real quick, but we were talking a little bit about declassified information and how you considered it more low grade. And I was wondering how you could elaborate a little bit. What do you notice that's different insofar as the information being presented versus what you've acquired?
Well, first of all, a number of those cases specifically I've written to the MOD about. These are from people that have told me about a UFO that's hovered over them. One particular case was a lady called Alwyn Granger, who was she was in charge of a girl guide camp back in '71 when this thing hovered over the tents and flew around and frightened them all. And then they heard the sound of what they thought was an RAF jet approaching, which is quite common to sightings of UFOs, and she contacted the MOD herself and didn't get anything, and I wrote to them and they told me that this would eventually be declassified, the report, but that was probably about 10 years ago, and it's never been declassified, and the same with another sighting over Staffordshire involving police officers. That's never been declassified, and I've yet to find anything in those files that is of any relevance. Most of the reports are obviously they're sanitized, they're blacked out, but there is no information in there. I'm convinced that if you like, the best stuff is kept to one side and classified again. So, to say that they're declassifying them is, in my opinion, well, it can't be right, because if you compare those files to what I've got, you would find that there would be nothing in those files of any relevance. And yet in what we've got, those are the relevant ones, because those are what people have experienced. But I'm told anyway, Nick Pope, told me, of course, that they never investigated cases; they just logged them. I think on occasion they did go and interview people, and but that's the answer to that.
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense right there. So, how often do you think the UFO crafts observed are actually being tracked from military or by military? Do they ever see a military escort associated with the craft?
Well, we do have reports, which is pretty strange stuff. But quite often these things obviously will show up on radar, and this will precipitate a scramble by Air Force pilots, many of whom don't actually see the object at all. Again, we've even got one report, and you've probably heard of a guy called Milton Torres that I spoke to some years ago. But Milton attempted to get a lock on. He's a United States Air Force pilot. He attempted to get a lock on one of these objects, and he was. He'd received orders to actually fire over civilian territory, discharge his weapons at this UFO. But 6 seconds before he was due to fire, it just disappeared. It completely disappeared. And that in itself has raised controversy over the years, because who on earth would have given the pilot of a United States Air Force pilot permission to fire on a UFO? As I say, we've got many cases like that, but I would just like to mention that recently, or a couple of years ago, I did speak to Lord Dowding's stepson, charming gentleman called David Wilding. And, of course, Lord Dowding was head of RAF Fighter Command in the Second World War, the Battle of Britain. And he was very much a believer in UFOs, and he himself said back in 1954 that more than 10,000 sightings have been reported, the majority of which cannot be accounted for any scientific explanation. Example, hallucinations, light refractions, or things falling from aircraft and the like. Now, we since discovered that he actually went to the States to discuss the UFO question with the President of the United States, and that was back in the early 1940s. But of course, the problem is human nature being what it is. People forget about this, and people don't know about this, and people rely on what's happening now as opposed to their knowledge of what happened before. And I know I go back to the books and say that that's the whole idea of doing the books, really.
Right, yeah, let's get some accuracy right there, because the history is being rewritten as we speak. A lot of it is. It seems like they're just editing so much. What's that?
Sorry, you just disappeared then.
No, I was okay. I was just saying it just seems to me like they've just rewritten everything, and that's why it's so important to have some kind of accuracy with information and some of these eyewitness testimonies.
Well, that's right, to the best of our ability. But one thing that is off-putting as I turn around, and you can't see, but next to me is something like about 1,000 books on UFOs that people have written over the years. And admittedly, they're smaller books and just text. But I mean, so many people, you know, not only in England but in the States have sought to make the public aware of what all this is about. And here we are, 2015, and you've got to ask yourself, has anything changed?
Exactly. Well, I think the internet has helped quite a bit insofar as educating people. I mean, obviously you have to sift through the good and the bad and the positive.
Well, exactly, yeah, the good and the bad. And, of course, a lot of people prefer to look on the internet for the information, as indeed we all do, because it's a wonderful tool, really, isn't it, for information. But how many times do you see the same information recycled? And you know, some of it is dubious, to say the least. But, yeah, I mean, without it, we'd be really stuck. But sometimes, of course, one has to appreciate that just how many millions of sites there are out there, and a bit like the stars in the sky, that you can only access a certain number.
Right. Well, at least it brings awareness of the situation, at least from what I can see. But how many photographs have been captured in connection with the UFO sightings that you've been able to identify and actually catalog?
Well, over the years, we've I mean, there are famous UFO photographs here. There's the Conisbrough photograph of 1966 that was taken by a guy called Stephen Pratt and his brother Kevin, and we have the photograph. We know the brothers personally, and the story there was that the whole family saw the UFO before it was photographed. And when it was photographed, you know, the object the dome-shaped object was different to what they saw in the sky, which is not unusual. But of course, over the years, people have ridiculed them and accused them of hoax, which is all part of the same territory. But we believe that it's authentic, and we've presented that. And in the case of another guy called Alex Birch, his photograph, and others, and there was an interesting one down at Leiston in Suffolk in November '79. Which that was a spate of UFO activity over there, and this was 12 months before the Woodbridge Bentwaters case. And there are a lot of people that think that well, not so much think, but we Brenda Butler, who wrote Sky Crash in '83 with Jenny Randles and Dot Street, that was the expose of the Bentwaters Woodbridge case, was told by somebody in November 1979 that a UFO had landed at the American Air Base, and that senior officials from the airbase had come out and greeted the occupants. And that might sound pretty odd stuff, but that was very similar to what was said about December 1980. But yeah,
right.
I must.
No, well, it leads me to believe there's a connection between the black technology connected to maybe covert military and the UFOs. What is your impression? I know you probably have never encountered anything that would confirm that, but what does your gut tell you?
Well, you're right. I haven't, but of course, you've been watching the news recently about the so-called UFO landing in Canada.
Right.
Yeah, that was interesting. But one always feels that clear film and clear photographs, and they appear to be genuine of UFOs, is a little disconcerting. I mean, they're saying that what landed was top secret covert technology, but of course you could always say that anyway, couldn't you?
Well, nowadays we have the technology to make it look real good with cameras too.
Absolutely, and it just it used to be so simplistic. In the last century, it was either faked or it was real, but now it's. Especially with computers, it's very difficult to know really what has gone on there. But unfortunately, we, within the space of a couple months, I suppose something else will happen, won't it? And we'll have forgotten about that, like we forget about missing airliners.
Right.
And there's some frightening things happening, though, aren't there, on the planet?
There really is. And, we touched on missing time just a little bit with the UFOs and sometimes some of the anomalies associated with a UFO. And I'm wondering if there is a mass kind of an amnesia going on where people are forgetting the critical aspects of what's going on in the world versus just paying attention. Is there something, do you think there's something out there that's actually creating this euphoric kind of alternate space where people are just not paying attention?
Well, I'm not sure if I can answer that. I don't know.
Well, I just had to ask you. It just seems like, when I look at the missing time and I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe people are in an altered space of consciousness and are being erased and they don't know it or something.
Well, maybe those UFO experiences. I mean, you notice, like when something very traumatic happens to you, what do we say? We say time seems to stop, and people say that a journey that should have taken 10 minutes took them 30 minutes. We do have reports where the persons concerned, a short journey of 10 minutes took them 30 minutes to get home, and people at the house have obviously been worried about the fact they should have arrived home. So that for the persons involved, there was missing time. But it's I suppose with traumatic events like that, I mean, we've got guys that have been on the motorway that were on the way home, and they arrive home 2 hours later, and then they say they've seen a UFO, and then they've got strange marks on them, and you can tell that they're still traumatized 20 years after the sighting. So it is. It's very. It's a concept that is not easy to understand, but when something traumatic happens to us, time does indeed appear to stop. But of course, we could start talking about what time is, and is time moving faster? I mean, is the world spinning quicker? Because I've got bad news for you. Because the older you get, the quicker the time goes. But that's not going to affect you for the time being.
Right. Well, I do believe the world is speeding up faster, and spinning in frequency and vibratory rate, in my own opinion. But have you ever noticed, is there an eyewitness testimony concerning a physical abduction? Have you ever heard of anyone actually being taken up in a craft? No. We have a lot of stories from people that they will describe being in the craft, and they will describe a similar story
story involving individual, humanoids and alien beings, and many stories like that. But we've no reports of anybody actually seeing anybody physically taken up into the craft. Which, I'm just thinking now. Was it the Linda Cortillo? Was it the one involving New York? The Bud Hopkins, who actually we met some years ago. Bud Hopkins was involved with that, and I think we've written that up into volume 11. But that wasn't as simple as it seemed. I mean, do you know that case?
Not too familiar with that one. No.
Yeah, well, she was floated out of it 11th, without recourse to my paperwork. I'm just trying to remember. But I think she was floated up out of the 11th story building or something, and people around saw her going upwards into this craft. But the guys that actually saw her were, they were a bit suspect. But yeah, no, we've not actually had anybody who's witnessed that physically.
Well, that's pretty wild. That alone is pretty wild, if you ask me. And then you wonder how much of it. I know there's a lot of regression involved with a lot of people who are quote unquote contactees or have had abduction experiences, and then you have to ask yourself how much of that is prompted versus a real experience with a craft. But you're getting hard data insofar as eyewitness testimony from a sighting.
Yeah. And of course, you can't write up about somebody who's had an experience without knowing them. You just can't. You have to meet the person, as we said before. You've got to meet them to know what they're like, and you analyze them in the same way they analyze you. But you just get a gut instinct. I remember a lady that contacted me years ago, and she said that she talked about an abduction experience, and she said she remembered as she went into the craft. She said that she walked across a grill which made her feet hurt. Anyway, the next morning when she got up and she reported it, apparently when somebody examined the bottom of her feet, they found that there were some marks on the bottom of the feet consistent with having walked over a grill. But again, you can't say that is you can't say that is substantial evidence, but you can say that is obviously that's certainly worth speculating on, if you like. But people have been having these experiences. I think more people than we will ever realize have had these experiences. And somebody once said to me, well, how do we know we haven't all had that experience, but we've forgotten about it? So
good point.
Maybe it's far more prevalent than we realize,
Exactly. Well, it reminds me of a Dream Pool Collective. Once again, are people just witnessing amnesia from day to day, and have they been slept, or are they being slept in association with some of this anomalous activity is my question. And of course, we don't know, but I mean, it certainly seems something's afoot. I think obviously something's afoot, without a doubt.
Yes, I agree. Of course, something's been afoot for a long time, but again, there are those, in authority that don't wish people like us to get involved in this, because we should be just like the rest of like the majority of the population that just perhaps they just exist, and they're subjugated by the amount of let's be honest, the amount of the rubbish on television. I mean, there's some great stuff on television.
Oh, I agree with you, though. Yeah,
there is some of that which is, it denigrates what people are all about, and as I say, we don't watch the stuff, but we do watch television, and we over here we do like the soaps, and so in fact the soaps reminds me, because I don't know whether you've ever heard of Coronation Street.
No. Mm-mm.
Yeah, well, Coronation Street, you'll have to come over here and watch
I
it.
know. Well, I don't
That's
watch television.
no, no, no. Well, no. There's a lady that passed away at 91 years of age a couple of years ago now, but she was a barmaid in this pub in Coronation Street, and this lady and her sister, I mean, they're quite famous over here. They did have some UFO experiences and probably an abduction experience. And we spoke to them and they sent us a signed photograph. And Frida Driver was the sister's name. And she told us all about this and we recorded it. But of course, it's not generally known, but it's just something else to record, and it's of interest because they were chased home by a UFO. And when they got home, the thing hovered over the house, and the dogs were frightened. And again, it doesn't sound very much, but by God, if you're in a situation where this is happening to you, you'd be terrified.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Yeah, well documented once again. So, have you ever been asked to stand down from investigating UFOs?
Not yet.
Okay, that's good. And considering your background, I would suspect there's probably some camaraderie there, isn't there, in support system with different law enforcement and detectives concerning UFOs?
Yeah, you just went there. I lost.
Oh, that's okay.
I
I was just going to say, is there some camaraderie insofar as supporting each other who are investigating UFOs and supporting the exposure of UFO investigations with law enforcement and detectives out in the UK?
More with retired. A lot of retired police officers and detectives contact me and tell me about their stories, what happened, because you have to bear in mind that I suppose as a police officer you sign the Official Secrets Act, so technically anything that happens to you on duty you're not supposed to discuss with the public as such, I mean, as we said before, it wouldn't do your career any good if you. I mean, I've got sightings from police officers, one of whom was burnt on the face by what he saw back in the 70s, and I have a lot of sightings by police officers. One I remember one chap was he was a detective and he was on a night duty and they were watching they were keeping observations on a house and a UFO turned up overhead and they chased the UFO and he contacted the radio controller and the radio controller then got some traffic cars to chase it up the motorway, and sometime later they lost the object, and a few months afterwards the BBC did a panorama program on it. I haven't seen the program, but apparently there were a number of civilian witnesses who were on the program, but not the police officers. So the end result was that it was clearly suggested that the civilians had seen probably Venus or Mars, Venus or Mars running up the motorway. So, but it's just part of the great cover-up, I'm afraid.
Right, and you can't blame law enforcement. I understand they have to, if they have to keep quiet, I understand that. So, but it is nice that they come forward after they retire.
Well, they're intrigued by what they've seen, and I remember another guy, police officer on duty one night, and he came across a perfect circle in the tarmac on the road that had been burnt out, and shortly prior to that, a UFO was seen hovering over the tarmac. That is unusual. I mean, we do have lots of sightings of UFOs over over fields, and you go back to the so-called UFO nests, which were caused by UFOs interacting with the ground, as opposed to the more elaborate crop circles that appeared in. Well, they're still appearing.
Right, and those are totally different animals, right?
They are absolutely, yeah. In fact, I'm not associating a link between animals and Colin Andrews, but we talked about animals, thinking about animals in crop circles, and then of course Colin Andrews, he's I mean, he's done the forward for the Wiltshire book. So, and I'm just going to mention. So, if anybody's ever been to Stonehenge or Avebury, or any part of Wiltshire over the years and have had experiences, we would love to hear from anybody and write them into the book.
Exactly. So let's elaborate a little bit more on the burn circles. I'm just curious. They're not like crop circles. Obviously, they're just a circle.
Just a plain circle where they're burnt. In the 1990s, Dawn and I spent quite a lot of time in the Wiltshire area, and we have visited some freshly made circles, and I can say that to stand on the edge of a freshly made circle is quite an exhilarating experience, because there's just something about it that is just these were not hoax, these were genuine. And of course people have had the soil analysed and found that in some of the cases that there's been a tremendous dump of microwave heat, hot enough to fuse flint and with stone and all sorts. So clearly that's not the work of that's not a man-made thing, and that immediately reminds me of a guy called Mr. Tilt. 67, Wiltshire, Mr. Tilt and his wife were driving home, and they saw a triangular object in a field. So the wife said, "Well, let's go home. I don't want you going close to it." But he said, "No, look, this is really weird. I'm going to go and have a look." So he went over and got close to it, and then it took off. Well, they reported it the next morning to a UFO researcher, and analysis was done of the soil, and that was found. This was the case where all the flint and stone were fused together. Now, I spoke to his wife some years ago, and after he passed away, Mr. Tilt, and his wife said, "Well, you won't believe this," she said, but he, after the incident, he had 3 marks in a triangle on his chest, and these gave him great concern over the years, and they were still there the day before he died, and they were not there the day before this took place. So, and then oddly, this is. I mean, these things are so weird, but they are true. Another lady that I spoke to, she saw something hovering over the house, and the next day, her daughter, who was about 6, said, "Look, Mummy, I've got something on my chest," and she'd got 3 marks, triangular marks. Well, the mother looked for herself and found the same marks on her chest. And this is where it gets really bizarre, because the husband, who was working 20 miles away, came home, and they were talking about it the next day, and he said, "Well, you won't believe this." He said, "I've got marks as well." So but if you read about this, you might have reservations. You might think, "Oh, are these people making it up?" But I've interviewed them, and they seem very genuine, and in some of the cases, we have the photographs, of course, of the marks, but that's as far as we can go with it.
Wow, that's just incredible. That's just fascinating. It sounds like some of these UFO craft were able, from some of your investigations, were able to mimic rather the observer to some extent regarding movement, etc. Wasn't there a case like that where that was actually happening?
I have come across this before, but I'm not so sure. I mean, when we talk about UFOs, we tend to lump, perhaps a number of different phenomena in the same sort of basket, as it were. I have come across cases where they have mimicked the movements of the observer, left to right and right to left, and but I'm not sure if it's the same. In the same way, I'm not sure if the number of sightings involving motorists that are persecuted by these things, and then maybe later report abduction experiences. It appears that it's the same phenomena for those. For people who report other abduction experiences, but maybe that we should start to segregate some of this stuff. I'm not sure. Right. And others would say it was probably Earthlights or something, or will-o'-the-wisps, or that sort of stuff. But but each and every one is fascinating.
Oh, they are. They're incredible. And what about intelligent control? Obviously, it's under some kind of intelligent control. A lot of these are. But what about an operator of the craft or some kind of an extraterrestrial? Has anyone ever seen an operator or something in the craft?
Yes, a lady. Well, yeah. I mean, one case springs to mind. That's a lady called Jessie Rostenberg. Jessie Rostenberg, who's still alive today, an extremely nice lady, lives up in Staffordshire, and she had a sighting in '54, October '54, and she said that just before it happened, she felt like she was going to catch a cold. And she was waiting for the children to come home from school, and she wondered why they were late, and she went outside, and at that precise moment the children came home, and she looked above the cottage, the farmhouse where she lived, and there was this dome-shaped object with 3 people gazing out at her. And again, that's something we've come across so many times, that humanoids gazing out, Nordics is, I suppose, is the way a lot of people describe them, gazing out compassionately at her. And then within a space of seconds, it shot off and disappeared. Now, the interesting thing there is that we found a guy in Stafford who was a school teacher who saw the same thing coming over, but it was making this terrible growling noise as it came over and discharging smoke, and then it disappeared. So, stories like that are not, as I say, they're pretty common.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it seems like, so the Nordics are one of the species they reference a lot, some of these people who observe UFOs.
And you went again then, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No, so the Nordics seem to be one of the more dominant species insofar as an observation.
Well, I don't know about dominant. I mean, people say that, I think our problem is that we try and use human conceptions of behavior and understandings of intelligence to define what these things are all about. I mean, for argument's sake, if these things are so intelligent, super intelligent, and that they've come all this distance, or that they've got capabilities and technologies far more advanced than us, why the heck do they end up invariably in committing cardinal errors, such as crashing to the ground a few hundred yards, a few hundred feet from the sky, and then rendering their crafts inoperable before they're repaired? And there are occasions when, they've landed and so-called humanoids have got out and tried to entice people into the vehicle, and it seems as if they had that technology, why would they get out and try and entice people at all? Couldn't they just just get them into the craft anyway? Or I mean, we have reports of humanoids or robotic figures that have got out of the craft and then try to force people into the craft. But then you've got to think to yourself, well, people perceive that as real, but is it real? Is it sort of? Is it an out-of-body experience? We just don't know, but they may not be as intelligent as we think they are.
Mm-hmm. Well, it certainly sounds. And then what comes to mind once again is the possibility of reverse-engineered craft and maybe an offshoot of some kind of a covert department, deploying their technology, which is kind of failing. What do you think?
I think we should bear that in mind, because we don't know how far advanced they really are. You hear all sorts of stories about bases on the moon, and why we haven't got a base on the moon and the other side of the moon. And I mean, that's something else that fascinates me, and all these strange things that have been seen on the moon, and the weird stuff that appears on Mars. Are they hiding a great big secret?
Well,
the
yeah,
best kept secret. Yeah.
it certainly seems that way to me.
Well, it does indeed, because common sense dictates that the sort of things that even NASA photographs on Mars and then says, look, offers no explanation because maybe they're not able to do so. But some of the things that are photographed really defy belief. It's fascinating.
It
But
really is. It's something else. I'll tell you what. So what do you think? Do you think there's a correlation with electricity versus a UFO in connection with? I know that sometimes it seems like they're attracted to electrical.
we do have quite a lot of sightings where UFOs will hover over reservoirs, over nuclear power stations,
Mm-hmm.
and over electrical substations. Yeah, I mean, there is that affinity with them. So they appear to be utilizing the energy or depending on the energy. But it's a bit like a lot of sightings also take place, certainly over here, near to ancient structures, such as Stonehenge, such as Avebury. We had a sighting from a guy that was driving home past the Avebury Stones in Wiltshire in the 1990s, and this huge ball of light came out of the sky and struck one of the stones. Well, he thought no more of it until about half an hour later, when he was actually stopped by a military vehicle, and the guy got out and threatened him and said, you did not see anything. The driver of the vehicle, who was actually a police officer, said, I know what I saw and you can't stop me talking about it. The next day, the witness had a phone call from the commander of the airbase apologizing for his man's his attitude, and saying that it was something to do with them. Anyway, the police officer's vehicle had to be written off because it was burnt, and all the electrics were burnt. And so, yeah, it's an intriguing story once again, a faithful report, but who knows? Who knows what it was? Was it a UFO? Was it part of some top secret technology or an experiment? We just don't know, because we don't know how far ahead they really are.
Well, I think that, considering if you look at the benchmark of Tesla, for example, I think it's pretty safe to say we've come a long way in the black underground with technology, and maybe a lot of that technology is not being exposed to the masses. But, what comes to mind is a particle beam weapon or something like that, where obviously they're deploying something. If the military shows up, it tells me they're probably involved in monitoring it, if nothing else.
Well, something that actually frightens me is the experiments that they're doing on the particle accelerators. They've been doing this since the 1930s, trying to split all these atoms. And I mean, I'm only a layman in this, but as a member of the public, I wonder what the end results with all of this technology is, and what are they doing to the planet. And I think wasn't it Stephen Hawking that said that if they do this, it could be goodbye Earth.
Right.
So it's frightening stuff. It really is. But I have to say, I'd just like to mention that you heard of Professor Brian Cox, the astronomer of here? Well, of course, I had to laugh because somebody's brought it to my attention that about 3 or 4 years ago, he was interviewed on the BBC, and he was asked about UFOs, and he said that UFOs don't exist, abductions don't exist, and that UFOs are a load of, I'm not going to say the word, but it starts with a B and ends with an S, and it's not bullshit, so sorry, but it's worse than that. But here we are, a guy, a physicist, a professional man, extremely well respected over here, and he says they don't exist. Well, of course they exist.
Absolutely.
Anybody that thinks they don't exist needs their head looking at. I'm sorry, but if they didn't exist, I wouldn't even be here talking to you, because I would have said 15, 20 years ago what a load of rubbish this is, and we wouldn't be having this talk.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, it sounded like he was doing damage control. That's what he's doing.
Undoubtedly, yeah. But was it orchestrated, or was it just? Well, how can you not? How can you deny that all of these people, these millions of people worldwide, are citing something, tremendous. And I mean, we've got all the sightings in the States in the night, and we've covered that in volume 10, as you'll read for yourself, about the mysterious green fireballs that were shooting over the nuclear bases, the nuclear weapons bases in the States, and Rob. But Hastings has written books on it, and these things are knocking out the nukes, and of course it just goes on and on. But there are people that just want to bury their heads, aren't there?
Totally. Well, I think it's this mass mind control too. I think they want to keep everybody distracted and just kind of disconnected from this. It's not even a possibility. We know it exists, and it's a significant amount of activity across the planet when it comes to UFOs. And like you've said before, it's been going on for a very long time. So, just now that you're documenting, I'm so glad, like I said, I'm so glad that you're documenting this data, because I don't know many people who have the accuracy you do insofar as the way you've put it together as a big encyclopedia. It's fascinating.
I sometimes I wonder why I've never lost interest in it, but I never have done, and it's been, I suppose it's because it probably sounds a bit corny, but it's about the people. I mean, these people have seen so many things and had so many close encounters, and their stories should be preserved. And a lot of these people have, some of them have passed away, and I feel very passionate about that. So it's about them, and so many people have had tremendous things happen to them, and why shouldn't it be recorded? Because if we were talking about the medieval ages and we were talking about history, because we've always focused on history, why shouldn't it be recorded for future generations?
Absolutely. I think it's part of our celestial heritage and birthright, if you ask me. It's the people have a right to know. That's the bottom line. And I do believe that they should be, educated.
People have a right to decide, based on the evidence on what has taken place, rather than making a decision based on dubious stuff, and there is a lot of dubious stuff about, and I don't know whether there's an alien presence on this planet. I don't know whether there's an alien presence that works with governments or dictates what sort of world we live in. I don't know, because I can't prove it. But what I can prove is that thousands upon thousands of people have had close encounters, have had sightings of UFOs, and have had traumatic experiences. Some people regard it in a different light, that they think that the whole of their life can be changed because of a UFO sighting. So, yeah, I just think these people, their stories should be told.
I agree. I totally agree, and I'm glad you're doing it. And what does the Crown say? What does the Royal Crown say about UFOs? Do they ever address it?
Well, that's a bit of a difficult question because you're not the only one to get a book. You with me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you. Okay.
No, I can't say that. I can't say that those books do go to people in royalty. I can't say that, but off air I will tell you who. Off air I will tell you who has them.
Okay, yeah, that's all right. I was just curious.
I do have a lot of letters. I mean, I did recently. I discussed. I don't think he was very happy, but I discussed briefly what I was doing with the cultural secretary, who's actually my MP. Because I did write to him, and he didn't get the letter. So when he gave a talk at the village about a problem with motorists, I buttonholed him and told him what I was doing, and he sent me, you'll see in volume 10, there's a letter at the back from him saying that he will look forward to reading the books with interest, and this gentleman could be our next Prime Minister in due course. But yeah, it's and of course over the years I've I originally wrote to the Lord Hill Norton some years ago and chatted to him, and he told me he was a bit scathing actually. He said, well, if you want to know about books, UFOs, speak to Timothy Good. He said, I haven't got the time because he said to discuss it with you. He said, if I had I got the time, he said, it could take 100 years to tell you about UFOs. And but I have the letters from him, and of course, Flying Saucer Review. We met Gordon Creighton in so many years ago now. We first started, went and saw Gordon Creighton from Flying Saucer Review, and he made us consultants for Flying Saucer Review. Sadly, that magazine no longer exists, but it was published by Gordon Creighton and his son Philip, that I got to know, and it depended on a number of consultants, from scientific consultants and academics, very clever men, that told their stories of what had happened. And so, it's a shame the magazine has gone. Mm-hmm. And there are very few UFO magazines over here. I don't know what it's like in the States there.
Mm-hmm. I don't think we have that many either, although I do see a lot of alternative media. They have their own little blogs and things like that. And yeah. But I really think that they're trying to at least, skew everything to some degree insofar as the information goes.
But a lot of people tell me it's not the same as a magazine. In the same way that people say that you can't, a lot of people say you can't beat having a book as opposed to going on the internet and downloading an ebook or a magazine. For me personally, I prefer a book, and the trouble with the internet is that as time goes by, of course, I don't think it will personally. The stuff that's happening today will probably not stand the test of time. How much of it is going to be forgotten about in 10 or 15 years? But at least if you have a book, it's there in print for you, and you can use it as a reference, and you can know exactly what has taken place. Absolutely. I love books. Yes. And I highlight all my books as well. I don't know if you do, but I do. But yeah, I have to have the hard copy for me anyway. Yeah. It's definitely something, well, just like libraries of old. I mean, I just love old history, and the fact that we've had, some things in print. Of course, some of it's been confiscated, but it's nice to know that you're archiving this data. And also, now, have you noticed that some of these people who have observed the UFOs, have they been tracked by MIB types? I don't think you've been shadowed much, but have they? I hope not. But yeah, MIBs. Well, one particular. Well, I say one particular site. My greatest problem is I have too much to talk about, and I mean, if we were to go through the books and the files, we'd need 24 hours. So I try and rely on my memory as opposed to reading. It's no good just reading through books and paper and stuff. But yeah, one guy is an ex police officer. He saw a UFO. He was out fishing, and he saw this dome-shaped craft appear above the lakes. Well, he'd never seen anything like this before, and he was quite frightened. And he thought, well, what do I do? And he was about to throw his rod at it, and it disappeared. and when he looked down, the maggots that he'd been using had pupated. Well, for the maggots to pupate normally, as I understand, takes about 24 hours, but they'd pupated in 15 minutes. When he got home, he didn't tell his wife, but he wrote it all out, and I have the original notes. But from then onwards, he received a number of threatening telephone calls telling him not to tell anybody, not to go public about what had happened, which was very odd because the only person he told was the MOD. He rang up the MOD and told them. And then he was persecuted. He was stopped by other police officers all the time and not given an explanation. He was then involved in at least 3 accidents where the numbers had never been issued, and this is quite frightening stuff. And he then, to cut a long story short, he eventually went for an MRI scan, and the surgeon said, "Have you had an operation on your brain?" And he said, "Never." And he said, "Well, you have scars on your brain." So some years later, he tried to get a copy of his MRI scan, and the hospital said he'd never been there. Went to his doctor. His doctor said, "I've got your files here." Went to the cabinet, found the files were missing. And then the story ends with when the receptionist retired from the surgery, she went to see the ex-police officer and said, "Were you aware that 2 men had called round and taken your medical records? So if you can work all that out, I can't, but at least it's all documented." And that is an unusual case. That is unusual. But again, 1954, a guy called Nigel Frappel on the way home saw a dome-shaped object in a field, didn't report it. His brother reported it to the BBC. The BBC came, and it was a big story at the time. And a few days later, knock at the door, 2 men stood there and said, "If you ever say anything again about what you experienced, you will not live very much longer." And I could tell you about another case, but I'm thinking about the time now, but so many others like that where people have been threatened. And so, yeah, are they MIBs or are they government operatives? I don't know. I tend to think that they're probably government operatives.
But certainly sounds like that. And yeah, we are getting ready to wrap this up in a little bit here. But I do want to thank you so much, John, for being with us tonight. It's been wonderful to have you on. I'd like to have you back soon, so please come back when you can.
Right, thank you. And please let me know what you think about the book.
Oh, I can't wait to read it. I'm so excited. I was going to ask you real quick about the scarring. Now, you said that gentleman had scarring of the brain. Is that coming from a directed energy weapon? What caused that?
I just don't know. He was in close proximity to the object, very close indeed. And, again, I know we just don't have the time, but I have other reports like that where people have been in hospital and strange things have happened to them, and records have gone missing. It's all part and parcel of what happens to people. Right. Some terrifying stuff, really. Yeah, it's highly suspect. And I do have one quick, looks like a little question here that someone texted me. Looks like Steve texted a question. I'd like to know if anything, let's see here. He believes the ships are coming from, he wants to know where you think the ships might be coming from. Any idea insofar as what your own impression is? Or do you think it has something connected to time travel or other dimensions? Well, again, I just don't know. Some people believe that they're extraterrestrial and they've got the capability of being able to obviously get here quicker than we would expect them to. Some people think they're interdimensional. Personally, I don't think that's such an important thing. The fact is they're here. Right. They have the ability. They've been here for a long time now, and they will continue to interfere with the affairs of man for a very much longer time. And the frightening part is that when we're gone, because, the planet isn't looking too good, but when we're gone, they will still be here. Right. Well, let me ask you this. Obviously we have a connection to them. It's almost as if we're their ancestors, or they're our ancestors. They were here obviously before we showed up. So yeah. Wouldn't that tell you that they're related? It would indeed. I agree. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's obviously a connection.
I think
But do
so.
we need? But do we need each other to survive? That's what I'm interested in. Do we need them? If they weren't here, if UFOs didn't exist, well, would that perhaps? I don't know. I mean, would that upset the delicate balance? Do we need this balance? Is it a balance, or is it?
That's a good
Just don't
question,
know.
John.
But I mean
That's a really
yeah.
good question. Well, to me, it seems like I believe mankind needs to ascend to a higher level of quote unquote spiritual development and consciousness because look where the planet's going right now, insofar as what's happening. So we need help, and
Crazy.
maybe this will be a divine intervention at some point in the continuum. I don't know, but it's
Well,
fascinating.
yeah, but I mean, can you believe that in the middle of the 20th century, can you believe that we're such a tiny little fragment spinning in the universe? Can you believe that men were actually exploding atomic bombs underground? Can you believe that?
Right? Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's frightening. Yeah,
It's
I
almost like we're
mean,
going back into the dark ages, and of course, I don't think the censoring and the coddling and the deception game is really appropriate right now. I think we need to put everything on the table in order to help our own evolution.
I agree. I mean, one of these days we will stop doing what we're doing to each other. It's such a crazy world because, in effect, we are on a spaceship, aren't we? Because
Yep.
that's what the world is.
I was thinking
It's a
about
small,
that. A big UFO.
old spaceship.
I totally
Yeah.
agree with you. Now, John, if people want to get in touch with you, I guess they can do that through your website, or if they have maybe some stories or
They can.
experiences.
Yeah, I mean, there's a report form on the website, or if they just put in John Hanson Haunted Skies, they'll find a telephone number or email address, johndawn1@sky.com. johndawn1@sky.com. It's dead easy. We're there for you.
You're so awesome,
And if they've
John.
got any experiences, they want us to publish anything, whatever they want us to do, we'll do it.
Well, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It's been an honor to interview, by the way. It's been
and likewise.
It's been really fun. I want you to come back. I'll get you back on my show for sure. We have more to discuss. And right before, I think we have maybe 2 minutes plus or minus here, and I'm sure you have time to answer this quickly. But has there been any information as far as a propulsion system from the crafts or any observation from a UFO witness?
We do have statements from people regarding the propulsion. One lady was able to draw the propulsion system inside the craft. We've got those drawings, and they match other drawings that people have made notes of. So yeah, but again, I just don't know. I mean, is the whole thing a camouflage? I mean, why do humanoids look like people?
Right. That could be a cloaking system. Yeah, that was another question I was going to ask you. Is there a dominant color associated with the UFO sightings at all?
Not really, no. So many different colors. But again, what people must look for is the three objects. The times that people will find the three objects, triangular or I think that's me. Is that
No,
you?
it's us. We're out of time here, John. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, John, so much. It's a pleasure to have you on. And stay tuned for Shiny Side Out with David Dunger and Becky coming up next to sail you on into the night. And thank you, John. And everybody take care.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Revolution.